In my last video, I talked about if statements in Python, and I just showed you the structure of the most basic type of if statement that we can have. Today, I want to elaborate on this a little bit more by talking about the else and elif clauses. We will start with a review. Let's just have a variable, maybe temperature, and maybe the current temperature is 28 degrees Celsius, which I would find too hot, so maybe we'll say if temp is bigger than or equal to 25, I'm going to print it's too hot outside. In my opinion, probably not in most people's opinion. So as a reminder, what's happening here is we have an if statement, so we always start it with the word if. Then we have a conditional. This is something that's going to be true or false. So temp bigger than or equal to 25 is either going to evaluate to true or false in your computer. And if it's true, then everything that happens indented after this colon gets executed. So right now I just have it set up so that if the temperature is bigger than or equal to 25, we're just going to print it's too hot outside. However, you don't have to just have print statements in these if statements. You can have as much other code as you want. Maybe if someone, if some condition is met, you want a whole bunch of code to run, and that's fine as long as it's indented below the colon after the if statement. But I am, for the purpose of these videos right now, using just print statements because it allows us to see immediately whether or not we have entered into the if statement. So here, since the temperature is equal to 28, which is bigger than or equal to 25, it should print. And it does print it's too hot outside. If I change the temp to 7 degrees, then I evaluate this. You see it didn't print anything because the temperature bigger than or equal to 25 did not evaluate to true. Now I want to introduce an else clause, because right now the way we have this set up is if the temperature is less than 25, just nothing happens. But if I modify this and I say, okay, if it's bigger than or equal to 25, print this one statement, else print, that's better. Then what happens here is, since my temperature is 7, it prints what happens under the else clause. So what happens is when you go into this statement, if we don't pass this first if statement, if this doesn't evaluate to true, then we don't execute the code under this colon. But then when we hit the else statement, if we didn't enter the if statement, then whatever code is underneath the else is what gets executed when we don't satisfy the first condition. So if I go back to setting temp equal to, I don't know, we'll do 25 now, and then I run this, of course it's just going to print it's too hot outside, and it skips whatever's in the else. So it'll just do one or the other. These if, else, and elif, which I'll introduce momentarily, will only enter one of the possibilities always. So it's not that it'll say it's too hot outside and then also say, that's better. Only just one. Maybe that seems obvious, and that's great. Now my current if statement just has if temp is bigger than or equal to 25, it's too hot outside, and else, that's better. But in real life, this isn't how I feel. If the temperature got below like minus 35, I might not want to go outside. So I want to have 3 different conditions. Maybe an that's better, but also it's way too cold, don't go outside for too long. So if I want to have 3 different things happening or more, I can use elif. So elif temp is bigger than or equal to minus 35. Now I will print, that's better. Elif is just short for else if. So we go into the if statement. If that doesn't happen, then it says else. Try this other statement. Is the temperature bigger than or equal to 35? And then if that still doesn't get entered into, if we have an else statement at the end, then this is what will end up being printed. So print, it's too cold to be out for very long. So right now the temperature was set to 25, so it's still saying it's too hot outside. But of course, if I set temp to something like 0, we're going to get a different outcome. So if temp is set to 0, it says, "Ah, that's better." So what happens here is, well, temperature is not bigger than or equal to 25, so it skips the first statement. Then it goes to the else if, the elif. Then it checks, okay, is the temperature bigger than or equal to negative 35? And if so, which in this case it's 0, it prints, "Ah, that's better." And then if the temperature still, like if neither of these conditions had evaluated to true, if the temperature is below minus 35, it would have print, "It's too cold to be outside for very long." And then with these elifs, we can have as many as we want. So it doesn't always have to be one if, one elif, and one else. There's one if, there's one else, always a maximum of one if and else. However, the elifs we can use as many times as we want. So I'll just, I won't make a crazy long statement, but I'll go back to this one and maybe I'll change it and say, okay, elif maybe we'll say if the temperature is bigger than or equal to 0, then it'll say, "Ah, that's better." Elif the temp is bigger than or equal to negative 35, we'll print, "Grab a jacket." And then last, we'll print "It's too cold to be outside for very long." Okay, so here I have two elifs. I've just refined the conditions a little bit more, one more break-off point, and then based on what the temperature is, whatever the variable temp is, we're going to enter one of these four statements, and hopefully the structure of which one we are going to enter into makes sense now. And again, to reiterate, we can put multiple statements below any of these. So if I wanted to print multiple things or do multiple actions under any of these individual statements, I would just add more code in here. It would just have to be indented. So everything in the indent would be executed depending on which part of the code we entered into. So again, I'm just doing one statement with a print, but that is not what you have to do when coding. We just want to understand the syntax of this and the structure of these statements. So that's it for today. Just understanding that if statements can have an elif and an else, and the if has a condition after it, a Boolean condition that evaluates to true or false. The elifs also have to have a Boolean condition that evaluates to true or false. And then the else, if you include it, will happen if none of the Boolean conditions above had evaluated to true. But the else doesn't have to be included. You can leave it out and just have nothing happen in those cases as well. So I hope you enjoyed and see you in the next video.